walking through the woods or in your backyard or connecting with, for some reason, this tree or this bush reaches out to me, this flower, I'm connecting with it for some reason. Why is that? And taking the time to acknowledge that can bring some self-awareness as well. And okay, I'm connecting because I'm feeling hurt in this area, I'm feeling wounded here.
Priscilla, welcome to Wild News. It's so lovely to have you here with me.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to talk about, obviously, nature, ecotherapy, trauma, and hopefully bringing in some elements of your expertise in astrology and EMDR as well. So people listening and watching, this is where we aim to go. And then some juicy tangents that come up along the way, always welcome.
Okay, I like that.
So I'd love to start with where or when nature came in, because you've obviously got your qualifications as a therapist and the work that you do. So when did nature start to creep into your work?
I think nature was always there, and it was hard to deny nature. And I always thought, I get a lot from nature. I wonder if other people will as well. So I started to think about that and how I can incorporate. And then I realized there's a whole study on ecotherapy, and there's actually a track that you can study to become an ecotherapist. And there's no real certification. I was reading a lot about it, and there's no real qualifications or certifications that you need to be an ecotherapist. But I wanted to incorporate a lot of the different elements of it into my work.
That's so interesting for me to hear about this sense of you noticing the connection that you have with nature and thinking something here is working.
Yes.
And then getting a little bit more curious and then discovering ecotherapy. Because I remember when I first discovered that term and I was like, oh, people are already writing about what I just seem to be experiencing.
Exactly. I get so much energy from just going for a walk or a run or anything that connects you to nature. Even walking in your backyard mindfully can really connect you, and you start to think more internally. That's what it really is about. You're more aware of your internal process, which a lot of times we don't take time to do. And it can help us, it can help other people around us. So there's so many benefits.
I'm curious in terms of what you think the connection is between nature and healing. Like, it might be a specific story that you've noticed with yourself, but what's your theory about why it works?
I think it is having to do with getting outside of ourselves, but also remaining inside. And so as we're going about this world, and a lot of what I've been reading too is a lot of times we're feeling stressed because we're not sure about how the earth is going to continue. I think we're subconsciously stressed about that. And so we do things like pollute or overdrink or overindulge or overdo things that help us feel better because we're not necessarily connected. And if we connect and we become a part of nature, then we're now getting outside of ourselves, but we're also maintaining that internal process. It's like a dual relationship. And we're creating a relationship in a sense. I know it sounds weird, but we are. And I think it's important to have that with animals, with all kinds of nature, not just trees.
That's so interesting what you're saying about the external and the internal, because on some level it doesn't make sense, and yet when you've experienced it, it's like, yes, there is this strange experience of coming out of some sense of internal stuckness and getting a wider experience of something, and then coming back into a different internal experience.
Exactly. That's it. Being able to notice what's around and be in tune with that. And sometimes nature can bring a positive reinforcement or an encouragement or a symbol to us that is meaningful. And if we're looking out for that and we're aware of that, which takes a lot of mindfulness, which actually in turn can increase neurons in the brain, as they've discovered, there's a lot that goes on with that. So.
That positive reinforcement, yeah. Talk a little bit more about that, because I'm like, oh, I so know what you mean there. So yeah, give us a bit more detail there about what you mean, what this positive reinforcement could be.
Right, walking through the woods or in your backyard, or connecting with, for some reason, this tree or this bush reaches out to me, this flower, I'm connecting with it for some reason. Why is that? And taking the time to acknowledge that can bring some self-awareness as well. And okay, I'm connecting because I'm feeling hurt in this area, I'm feeling wounded here, and I need to know that there's a lot of truths in nature. For example, trees are always steadfast, but then the leaves change. So this isn't forever. That's kind of a message that came to me the other day when I was thinking about different things in my life. And I thought, well, this tree changes. It's not always here. It's always here, but it's not always in the same form. And it's appreciating its change. And when we can be open to change, I think that's when we have hope. Okay, this situation is not going to be the same for me.
I'm going to dive in a little deeper in terms of how you work with ecotherapy, but I'd love to bring in the EMDR as well, because when I saw that in your bio, I was like, can ecotherapy be a complement to that as well?
Yeah, well, EMDR focuses a lot on bilateral movement of the eyes, or if you can't use eyes for whatever reason, you can do tapping as well on your body, but it has to be bilateral. And that is what Francine Shapiro discovered in EMDR about maybe 20 years ago. And I wonder, and I don't know, I know people have discovered bilateral music and sound can also evoke that processing method of bilateral movement. And I always wondered, you're walking with one leg and the other, is it possible that you can also imitate that process as well? Now, I mean, sometimes in EMDR you're focusing on really intense trauma, and so maybe you don't want to walk at the same time. But I'm wondering, for lighter things that bother you, if walking it out actually helps.
I guess the reason I was thinking is because, I mean, exactly what you're saying, just that actual act of going for a walk. I mean, I might go for a walk, and I'm not necessarily going for a walk in a traumatized state, but I might be going for a walk in a troubled state.
Exactly.
And that process of just plodding along a path can really be beneficial. But I've also read something about when we're walking, because we are making those eye movements, we're looking at the landscape. So I wonder if there's almost a little bit of that happening anyway, without the guidance of how to make those eye movements.
Absolutely, that's very possible. And we can't limit just one way sometimes, even though they've also done studies on the tapping, and it works just as well as the eye movement. So who's to say someone can't research doing the walking and the moving of the eyes while you do that?
So let me go back, because you were saying, when I was asking you how you brought nature in, or when it came in, you were saying that you began to notice it, and then you saw this thing called ecotherapy. And whilst you don't necessarily need a certification, you can do training and courses.
Yeah.
So when did ecotherapy start becoming something, or when did you start offering nature in your work, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I started offering nature as a concept of, let's process and talk things out and walk at the same time, because it was less intimidating for somebody who's new to therapy to be sitting right in front of me, and it was very sterile environment. Well, in some cases, even as cozy as you make your office to be, it's sterile. So it was nice to offer that for people who like to walk, who like to use, and I didn't realize that actually was becoming a thing at the same time. Other people were using walk and talk as a therapy modality. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, great. This is a thing. It's not too weird. And then slowly ecotherapy started to show up, and I said, "Oh, this makes a lot of sense. This fits of what I'm doing." And I tried to incorporate it in a variety of different ways, but mainly for people who have trouble getting inside themselves. And because we're in a world where we're thinking of others, we're going to the schedule, we're doing things for other people, our family, our kids, everyone's watching us in a sense, and I'm always performing. It's hard to find time to really settle in. And when you create that space to do it, and sometimes therapy is the only space you have for that, then I find nature helps.
We're at this sort of internal, external place again. I think it's probably going to come up a few times because yes, I totally know what you mean. We can be so focused on other people. It might be because we are caretaking others. It might be because we're worrying about what other people think. So we're constantly viewing ourselves through other people's eyes. It might be that we're just so busy that we're always there to please others or do for others. So just give us a sense of how that happens. Like if someone's listening to this, like that's me, I can't get inside myself. Like I'm sort of in my head, but it's not my head really. It's my head, but filled with other people.
Yes.
What's the process of what happens? Like how does that get undone, and how does someone sort of come back to themselves and come inside themselves?
Yes, and that's where nature plays a big role in being able to, it's focusing on something. That's where the outside inside comes in, I guess, where I'm focusing on this particular piece of nature right now, and that's all that's important right now. Yes, thoughts might flood in. I might get distracted. That's okay. Just coming back. And how is this impacting me right now, and why is this important? And that opens the conversation for, okay, what's going on in your life that this is drawing this out? And I find that there's a lot to talk about when you're creating that space for somebody to connect with nature and then come back and say, yes, this is what's happening. I'm noticing something. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you're noticing.
So that's really interesting. It's bringing them into the moment, and then when they come into that moment, suddenly they're like, "Oh, I'm noticing that I'm feeling really tense in my shoulders." Is that what you mean?
Yes, it could be anything. I'm noticing this recurrent thought come up. Okay, let's notice that. Let's see where that's coming from. Why is that important right now? Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that idea of the positive reinforcement. So you can be in nature and you can see a tree and almost have a sense of like, and I get this all the time, oh, the tree is waving at me. Oh, I'm not invisible. Like, someone is seeing me right now.
Yes.
Is it also the same if you're working with a client that they might notice something which is almost like a metaphor before they even realize what the problem is, if that makes sense?
Exactly. And sometimes talking about it, talking through why they're connected to that piece of nature brings out that metaphor. Oh, well, that sounds like this problem or this issue or this situation that has come up before. Yes, that very well could be. And it brings that encouragement or positive reinforcement of, okay, there's meaning behind what I'm going through. And I know your audience enjoys creative outlets, and that kind of goes into as well, writing about it, telling your story, and being creative in that way. Even theater can help alleviate trauma by being in a safe place to feel emotion, because a lot of times we block that.
Yeah. And also, this is another thing I'm curious about, because let's say I'm looking at something in nature. Let's say we're in a therapy session right now, in the forest, and I say to you, oh my goodness, look at this tree in front of us. It's just completely broken. It's all
Mhm.
the branches are hanging off it. It looks half dead. Because what comes to me is, depending on the mood I have when I go into the forest, I will look at the same thing and I will see it differently.
Yes.
So I'm curious, does what what do you what goes through your mind as the therapist when you see or witness a client describing something, and in your mind you're thinking, that's not how I see it. Like, I'm seeing it completely differently. How do you navigate that moment?
Right. They're noticing broken and sad, and but that's what they're noticing. And I think it's important to notice without judgment, because
Mm,
the moment you put a label or a judgment on it, it depreciates the moment and what you're experiencing. And I think whatever we experience through all phases of life is important, and it's information and it's valuable. And so if that's what's being noticed, is that what's being felt, that's real.
mm.
That's important.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I used to manage a retreat for writers, and it was set in like 2,200 acres of outstanding beauty, or 22,000. I forget the number, but we were just surrounded by gorgeous nature.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, it was very quiet, other than the sounds of nature. So, someone coming from the city would think, oh my God, it's completely silent here. But
Yes.
as you know from spending time in nature, the more you sit, the more you realize how much sound is going on. So that was something I really noticed. People would arrive at the center and they'd either love the feel of the peace and the bird song, or they would be almost more anxious because of the isolation and the
Yes.
silence. Like, it really showed what their state was, whether they could welcome nature, or actually whether nature was almost triggering them. So this
Yeah.
is a place that I've often wondered about, because you and I are sitting here being like, nature is the most incredible medicine. But I
Yes.
suspect for some people, and I'd love to hear your experience of this, that actually the first few hours or the first few days of experiencing a very isolated space in nature can be incredibly triggering.
Yes, I agree. I think people who are gravitated to ecotherapy already have that mindset of, oh, I'm going to be in there in nature. Um, yes, I could totally see that. I haven't experienced that completely yet, except there are situations where people grew up just in cities, and and being truly isolated is scary, and I wouldn't recommend that. I would say try a suburban area with woods, and this kind of thing, because, or Central Park in your city, if that feels more comfortable to you, because that's a more that feels more like home too, and I think that's important.
So almost like gradually make your way into more and more wild areas, rather than like launching yourself straight
Right.
in.
Right. You don't want to be triggered. You don't want more stress and thinking about what's out there. I'm in the dark. I remember working in a group home where the kids were from gangs and different things, different lives that, I don't think any of us really unless you're in it, really understand. And we took them to the woods to camp, and it was suddenly they depended on me to help them with the bear situation and all of this,
Wow.
and it can be scary. I think it was supposed to help them, but in some ways I think there is that limit where you have these fears, and you're not necessarily there to overcome those fears. You're there to enjoy nature and be in tune with yourself. So yeah.
Wow. Let me bring in a little bit of transgenerational trauma, because I saw that in your bio as well. And I'm really interested, Priscilla, because I've definitely worked through moments in my life when I realize I'm healing something that's been passed down to me.
Yes.
So, what role in your own experience can nature play in helping individuals process something that isn't necessarily a trauma that's occurred in their own lifetime, but something that's transgenerational?
Yes. they're finding now through studies in epigenetics that trauma can be passed down up to 5 generations. And I started to notice this when I received a lady who had flashbacks of the Holocaust without ever being told a story, but it turned out that her mother was a survivor, and it makes sense that there's been these accounts and these stories of people having flashbacks that they never experienced, but somebody in their family has. And so nature can help with maybe processing some of that, where an EMDR can help with that too. It is a trauma that you may not have experienced, but it's a trauma that needs to be processed. And EMDR function in the same way, where you're processing in a bilateral movement this trauma that has occurred in the family. And sometimes trauma can be passed down through messaging. So if mom believes that because of her trauma that everybody needs to be shuttered in or something like this, then that's going to affect the mentality of the child. The outside world isn't safe, and maybe trauma and maybe nature can help with that trauma.
When you talk about this idea of it being processed, like what comes to mind is my experience of how I work through things that are really in my body, and that the sort of learning around that, the learning of there's so much just stored in my body. And I think that's why nature has been incredibly helpful for this part of my journey. So I'm curious, and actually, would you call EMDR a somatic therapy?
I think it can be, because you are feeling it. You are putting one foot in the past and one foot in the present. And in the meantime, you are thinking about the image, the thoughts, and the body sensations that are involved in the trauma. So it can be.
Okay. So yeah, I just wasn't sure if that would be like a somatic healing. But what's your experience of nature almost amplifying that somatic healing, or amplifying that somatic experience so that it can be processed? Because this is definitely something that I'm just like, for me, it's turned up the sensations in my body so that I've become aware of them, and then I've been able to process them. I'd love to hear if there's more experience that you've noticed of that as well, sort of nature being an amplification of those experiences in the body.
Yes, absolutely. And nature can also be there to ground, because this is real. This earth is beneath my feet. And when we become dysregulated, now we're grounded and we're regulated again. And I think having that opportunity to do that is very important. And nature can help.
It gives us that holding or that grounding where in the first instance we're not really able to give it to ourselves. I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, but I was very much in a place where I wasn't in my body. I had no idea how to hold myself, and it was nature that first taught me the feeling. Like, it sort of gave me that feeling as a download, and I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to be able to hold yourself. So that's always been my sense, that there's some sort of amplification of the sense in our body, or the feelings that we don't yet have, that we're able to almost learn just by being in nature.
Yes, absolutely. I've seen that many times. And it can open and then also ground, and there's a whole process that goes along with it, and it's a beautiful one.
Okay, so we've got a sense of we can be in nature and we can notice things that helps, maybe that gives us a metaphor, or we start to tune in, we start to come in again and we notice a repetitive thought. We might get some grounding where we just have completely been stuck in our heads.
Yes.
I'm also curious about your study of astrology as well. So how does that, let's first of all start off with how that might influence your understanding of trauma, because I think that would be interesting to hear about.
That is a good question. I've heard different astrologers say, and I'm not sure I can completely agree with this yet, but apparently where Pluto is in your chart can show signs of where trauma has been. But I think trauma is very personal for each individual, because what could be traumatic to you may not be traumatic to somebody else. And then you question the whole idea of resilience and the strengths that somebody already innately has. We all have the ability to heal ourselves. And so I'm not really sure what astrology says about trauma yet, but I'm excited to find out.
Mm. And here I'm going to really expose my ignorance in this area, but when I'm thinking of transgenerational trauma, I'm thinking of fears, I'm thinking of experiences that are literally passed down the bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also interested, can there be some connection with astrology and also what's being passed down in terms of where and when we're born, and almost like what can get passed down to us just because of the kind of planetary coordinates?
Yes, absolutely. And many psychologists and all researchers will say if you've had a supportive environment growing up, you will be a very probably more set up to be a mature adult, to your ability to evaluate emotions and process them becomes easier. But when you've had a more difficult upbringing where you weren't supported, you weren't delighted in, you were constantly put down or neglected or whatever, then it's going to be more difficult, and your information from the world is different. And that can definitely turn up in the natal chart, where maybe your fourth house has Saturn there. You had a parent that was very distant from you, or maybe your first house in your upbringing and your environment shows, Uranus. It was always up and down, and you never knew what was going to happen next. And yeah, that will definitely impact your life and how you see it and how you function in it.
How would you say then that you kind of use the insights from astrology, like knowing a client's birth chart, to help them in their journey of moving through emotional wounds or understanding their trauma?
Yes, I think it depends what everybody wants, what they're coming with and what they want to resolve. And when you're looking at the chart, you can see maybe, okay, these planets, typically Saturn is it's a personal planet, but it's also saying more about how we're overcoming challenges. And Saturn will remind us of, this is a lesson to learn, and how did you do with that? Because there's some, not only do we have our natal chart, but we also have transit, the planets that are always moving and always in the sky. They're going to come back to where our spots in our natal chart are. And so it's going to bring up some themes. And so looking at what are those themes and how is that coming to play now, and what would you like to do with that?
I think it can be super interesting. I love this idea of talking about themes, because again, it's almost like what nature does. It sort of brings us out of that very introspective stuckness, but it kind of gives us that broader picture within which to look at things. So again, sort of knowing the planetary alignments and knowing the themes that can show up when these planets are like this, it's like, oh, it's not just me,
yes,
the world against me. It's like, oh, there's a kind of theme that's playing out in my life, and I can understand it at that level.
Yes, absolutely. And if you are able to pick up on what that theme is, then you can learn from it and move through it, and you know how long it will be, because planets are only there testing you for a little bit, and then they pass and they move on to another place, and maybe that theme continues, but you've got a handle on it now. You know what this looks like, and that also can be helpful. And nature also goes along with the cycles of the planets and the moon. The moon is probably the easiest to track because it changes so much and it's close to Earth, and we can relate more because it affects the tides and all of this. We can see the moon at almost every night except for the new moon, and we can be in tune with that, and that can change the way we connect with nature and the rituals that we participate in, and that could be interesting as well.
I'd love to hear about something that you might have tracked or a theme in your own life that you might have worked with, and how you might have used nature and your own wisdom to move through that, if you don't mind giving us a little bit of a glimpse into something of your own.
Sure. Let me think for a moment. The first thing that comes to mind is, and I'm trying to think if there's something better to share, but I've always struggled with, and this goes kind of more into medical stuff, which I'm not trained in, so I would never talk to a client about medical things, but I can see I have a Sun-Saturn square in my chart, and that's considered a difficult aspect. And I've noticed this, how it's affected my bones, and I've had some different bone things going on that I've been taking care of. But because I knew that, and because I was taking care of myself, then I was able to overcome that problem and that issue. And so even though it is a continual theme, I'm not scared, because I know that this isn't necessarily my whole life. It's just a piece of it, and there's something I can do to help it. And as long as I'm taking care of it, I'm visiting doctors and I'm getting advice and I'm doing all of this, I'm going to be okay. Mm-hmm. And I think, and also with nature, there was a time where I couldn't do a lot. I couldn't run and walk. And so I sat in my backyard and noticed what was around, and it helped me create a sense of peace. And so I think with a lot of things that we don't have control over, or we have a lot of uncertainty, it's important to be able to create a sense of calm and peace in the midst of that, because there's a lot we can't foresee.
Thank you for sharing that. The sense I get is that having these tools, having this wisdom, gives you the power back, because you're not in this place of, why is this happening to me? You're understanding, mm-hmm. because of that square in your chart. You're like, oh, this is going to be a theme for me. How can I prepare myself for it? How can I do the right thing to manage the situation?
Yes, I like the way you put that. It brings back your power in a sense. Because you do have the power to make choices, and things don't necessarily have to happen to you. And if you believe in a benevolent universe, it's there to teach you and to help you, and so that you can overcome.
And I think that's a big step, isn't it? That belief in the benevolence. And
mm-hmm.
it kind of actually makes me think of when I first started to realize that nature was more than just a beautiful backdrop. Like, mm-hmm. I got a sense of like, wait, did I just get a message? Did I just get some information here?
Yes.
And you've read some of my work, so you know the sort of the visions or the downloads that I receive from nature, and I'm curious. Like, I know I'm not the only one, but I'm curious what happens, like what would happen if I was your client and we were out in the forest and I was like, oh, I'm getting this vision from this tree. How would you navigate that with me?
I would say, bravo, continue. Yes, what else is coming from that? And do you need support? I'm here to support you. If you need to talk about that internal process that's going on, does it feel scary? Is it too much? Can you do it? That kind of thing. And it sounds like you can. And that's the resilience we all have. We can do this. And I love seeing when that happens. Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting because I think the more I share, the more I hear from other people that they're having these experiences too,
Mm.
and experiences that they may have dismissed. So how much does that show up when you're working with people, or you yourself are in nature, and there's almost this automatic of like, oh, I'm making this up, or no, that just didn't happen.
I think it's important to give it its space and its power as well. I've gotten so many messages from the universe, from nature. Will you accept the message? Is what it's saying. And if you don't, that's okay. There'll be another message. It doesn't mean you've messed up this ability to receive messages. But I think it is taking it seriously. When you see a rainbow, that's a message. That doesn't happen very often. When a leaf falls on you, that's a message. Take it as a gift that the universe is speaking to you. And I think the more you open yourself up to that, the more you find meaning in things, and the more exciting life gets, because I'm participating now with something bigger than me that knows who I am, knows I exist. And it becomes crazy. Like, your mind can start to think such exciting things where, I can't wait to wake up and receive messages. And it sounds funny to say that, but it's true. And obviously, we're not going to use it as, I'm not saying I'm hearing voices or anything like this, but it's exciting when you can make something of what's coming to you.
Mm. And I so know what you mean about that excitement as well, because what came to me when I was first having these experiences, I mean, very quickly they were proving themselves to me.
Mm.
And I mean, really, the first one was so strange. I had a vision of being born from a tree, and I was like, I have no idea what this means. But
Wow.
that set me on a path of investigation that revealed that I'd had a birth trauma, and I didn't know anything about that.
Mm.
So I was like, it really seems like nature was almost curating my healing journey.
Yeah.
And when you talk about that excitement of waking up, it's created a different version of the world for me. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
do I want to live in a version of the world where I think I'm just nuts and making all of this up? Not really. Do I want to live in a version of the world where I believe that I'm in this incredibly magical collaboration with nature and it's guiding me to be the one I came here to be? Yes, please.
Yes, absolutely. It becomes magical, it becomes exciting. Yeah.
So let me go back, because we've sort of been talking about the level where we might be receiving downloads or visions from nature, but I want to come back to what you said earlier, which is just the beauty of being grounded, because I just don't think we can underestimate the power of becoming grounded once more. I have a theory that if the world were to all ground themselves, we'd be living in a really different world right now.
Very true. Very true.
And I do think that many people with trauma or who have emotional wounds, they are disconnected from themselves, and they're also disconnected from the world around them. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how someone can use or build a relationship with nature to restore that sense of connection with themselves and with the earth.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because trauma can dissociate as we become disconnected from our emotions, from our experience. And the minute we try to separate ourselves from something that happened to us, or an emotion, or whatever it is, we're now creating a distance within us. And then that's where the symptoms start, and that's where we struggle. So when we integrate ourselves, nature can help us do that. It can help us to integrate. And that also has some scientific value, because our left brain is all about logic and talking, and all our communication faculties are developed there. And the right brain is emotional and spatial and all of these other more abstract things. when we combine that by noticing nature, now I'm using my logical, but I'm also letting myself feel what that noticing feels like in my body. I am now combining my right and left brain, and I'm integrating them, and I'm now becoming a more whole person. So it goes way deeper than this is a blade of grass. This blade of grass is actually helping me integrate within myself, and that's powerful.
So it's almost as if the attributes and the characteristics in nature are so perfectly designed to bring both of those sides of the brain into work together, and so that they can come together. They're almost, they have to collaborate in order to fully experience what's going on in nature.
Yes, absolutely. Within ourselves, nature helps us draw within again, and it's a nice excuse to be able to look around. Okay, your story is very powerful. Being able to acknowledge your own trauma and your own self without being afraid of it, because you had that support. Nature supported me through this. I'm not alone. It's really nice.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier, that you have this sense of being understood or known by something, and I think that's incredibly healing.
Yes.
But also what you said, Priscilla, this idea that if something's happened to us, we want to separate from it, and that means that we separate from ourselves as well.
Absolutely.
And we may not be aware of that, right?
Yes.
So how might someone be feeling, or what might someone be experiencing if they have become disconnected or separated from themselves?
Yes, most people report that they have lost a sense of themselves. Find it difficult to make decisions. What else? Things of that nature, where it's difficult to think clearly, because now the brain, I don't know if it's necessarily split, but I would say that's what the feeling is like, where I'm not thinking straight, I'm not thinking clearly, because I'm in my body so much, in my agitated state, my nervous system no longer feels at ease. And so I'm living out of my nervous system state, which is agitated, or the other option is to be completely shut down. And so when you're in these two, it's difficult to feel like oneself, and it's difficult to make proper decisions that make you feel like they're coming from you. And so when you start to decrease the nervous system state, so nature helps calm our nervous system and to get back to ourselves, even if it's just for a couple of minutes. The goal is not to transform completely, I never feel anxiety again, but more to just shift. And the more you can shift, the more your body will learn to do that. And even if it's for a minute, that is success. And so I think the building that and being in nature, at least maybe 3 times a week or something like this, would be beneficial for everyone to start to just notice, not necessarily make any judgments yet or any healing journeys yet, just to be able to notice is powerful in itself.
I love this, because you're making it sound really simple. It's this idea of 3 times a week, we're coming into nature. We've got no intention other than to just let the body ground and calm down just for a moment, so that you then start to learn, oh, I can do this, and then the body starts to learn, okay, this is how we do this.
Yes.
And so you mentioned the noticing, because I thought it would be nice to sort of end with some kind of ritual, but this might almost be it. So how would you frame that? Like 3 times a week, what does noticing look like for you? And I were like, oh, I know what that is. But someone who's like, okay, I love nature, I know I have a relationship with nature, but how can I take that next step and be even more intentional about having a healing collaboration with nature? What might some very simple ritual look like?
Yes, there's a few. And I would say my favorite one is, and I love how you sign off your newsletter, or I think I'm calling it the right thing, with nature goddess. Am I getting
Tree
it right?
goddess.
Tree goddess. Okay, sorry. I love that because my favorite activity is naming, giving yourself a name in nature. I don't know if that came out of a nature walk for you, but when you connect with a piece of nature and giving yourself that name, you're now identifying something within yourself, a quality that you like, and you're also feeling that connection with nature, that you got that name with a special walk that you had, or a special moment outside, and it's meaningful. And I like tree goddess. I would like to take that as well.
Oh, I was going to say, what's yours? Do you have one?
I did have, so, and it can change. It can evolve as well as you go out. Maybe one day it's this, one day it's whatever you need, whatever you feel you want to connect with in that moment. I had one, leaf warrior, because leaves have this way of being different shapes, different colors depending on the year, different kind of style, but then they're warriors. They're thick. They fall to the ground, and even if you step on them, nothing really happens. You have to like really crinkle one up. So they're soft and gentle, but yet they fight. They're fighters, and I like that one.
Oh, that's gorgeous. Hey, who needs tree goddess when you've got leaf warrior?
Oh, that's funny.
And I love, like, when I really say those words, like, words are healing in themselves. The combination of those two words together, I feel some kind of alchemy within me when I say that to myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So therefore, you brought up another point. It's good to have a piece of nature in the name, and then a quality. That's the key. Quality that you have within yourself, that you want, that you're going towards, something like this, so that you feel inspired.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I mean, tree goddess has been, that name isn't going anywhere.
Oh,
I'm just
good.
slowly learning to step more into it. And it came from a vision quest when I was incredibly burnt out and I didn't know who I was anymore.
Oh.
So I went into nature to ask the question, and when the answer came, I was like, what the heck? It completely blew my mind. But I thought to myself, Priscilla, if I ignore this, I'll be burnt out again in a month, and I'll come back into nature and I'll ask the question again. Am I going to keep asking the question until I get an answer that I like?
Right.
So it was really a moment in my life when I was like, this is an answer that I just couldn't see coming. I have to trust it. And learning to be a tree goddess has and is continuing to change my life.
I love that.
So leaf warrior, so a little ritual of coming into nature. And how did that happen? How did you find or get the name? How might someone do that? What would it look like?
Yeah, it's just going out your backyard, your local woods, whatever it is you have. It could be your balcony with plants, and just taking as long as you need to notice what's around, to identify what's drawing you in, and asking the question, why is this drawing me in? And the answer is there.
And that comes back to the noticing, doesn't it? You're really noticing where your eyes are moving.
Yes.
So funny. I'm thinking of the EMDR. I'm like, I'm just,
totally connected.
Yeah, sort of like noticing that my eyes are traveling around. And there is a place where you get like that, isn't there, in nature, where you sort of, I'm suddenly, I find my body is turning, and then suddenly I'm just looking at something, and I'm like, okay, this is this is the plant or the tree that I'm supposed to connect with today. So
Yes.
yeah, so you're noticing what you're noticing,
Yes.
and you're combining the nature element with some kind of word. How did you describe it earlier? Like
A
a
quality that,
quality.
because when you answer the question, why am I being drawn to this? What is it about the properties of this plant or rock? It could be anything in nature. This bird, this whatever. Why am I being drawn? And when you discover why, oh, it's because I'm feeling like I need some encouragement, or I'm feeling down, or I'm feeling like I don't have enough support right now. And this is reminding me of that. So what's a quality that I know I have that will draw me to more people or to help me feel supported, things like this. And so that's where the name starts to come in. And you can wear that name for as long as you need. And then when you need a different one, you go back out in nature and you build another, or maybe you have several names, depending on what
Yeah.
you're going through.
Yeah. Oh, I love this ritual. This is, yeah, and it's also giving me more understanding in my own tree goddess apprenticeship, which I know I'm going to be on certainly for this lifetime, figuring out
Yeah,
why I'm called tree
a
goddess.
big one.
It is. Oh, this has been such a gorgeous conversation.
It has.
Priscilla, thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. And I've loved this idea of just merging all of these amazing modalities that you have experience of as well. What a great combination of things that you do.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's undeniable, like, tree goddess, and also just knowing that you need to connect, you need to do these things. And I love that you're putting it out there and making it accessible and real to people so they can relate. I think this is something that not a lot of people know about because they might think it's strange or they don't have time, things like this.
Mm,
So
yeah,
thank
the
you.
time factor, definitely. So I'd love to just give you a moment to reflect in our conversation and all of the things that we've talked about. Is there anything that you're like, this is what I'm thinking about now? I noticed that I'm thinking about this having been chatting with Gabriella for this time. Is there any thought that you're noticing or anything that just dropped in for you in the time that we've been chatting?
That's a good question. Uh, I'm just hoping that this is valuable to listeners and that they get out there and start noticing things. And if people have questions, to feel free to reach out. And I just want to be a support in this. We're across an ocean, and it's wonderful to be able to talk about the same thing, right? We all have nature somewhere. And I think it's beautiful to be able
Yeah.
to connect in our own way, even no matter where you are.
That's so lovely. And you mentioned get out there, which made me think of venture out, which is really that's what your brand is called, isn't it?
Yes.
Venture out. Yeah. So where's the best, we'll put links below, Priscilla, in the show notes, but where's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, my website, myname.com, priscillapodesta.com. That's the best way because that's where you have the email, that's where you have the knit form, and whatever way you want to reach out, I'm happy to greet you and give you advice, give you resources, whatever. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'd love for you to make a promise that your next nature name you're gonna let me know when it
Yes.
comes. I would
Yeah.
love to know what your next one is.
Okay.
I love this.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Gabriela.